to our Ingles on the Beat segment. Comes to you each Tuesday, brought to you by the fine people at Ingles Supermarkets. Hope everybody's having a great week. It's Tennessee game week after the bye week, and Georgia sitting pretty nice. Number 3 in the country. No season-ending injuries as they head up to Rocky Top. And want to talk real quick about the polls before we dive into some Georgia-specific information and some game-specific scouting report and discussion. You know, the first poll that comes out every Sunday is done by the Football Writers Association of America. I have a vote in that. It's called the Super 16. Not as maybe widely known as the AP Top 25 or the Coaches Poll. But in that poll, Georgia slipped down to 4 behind Ohio State. And I could kind of see that because Ohio State has looked really good. And really, Georgia against Notre Dame, a lot of people, believe it or not, were kind of disappointed. It was only a 23-17 game. Now, I think in hindsight, when we look back at this Georgia-Notre Dame game later in the season, I think it's going to look a lot better for the Bulldogs. I don't see Notre Dame losing another game. And I don't know how closely you watched the Notre Dame game or if you looked at the box score, but the Irish had 8 sacks, and they held Virginia to 4 yards rushing. They also rushed for 4 touchdowns. And I think that says something about Georgia. Now, I'm not saying that Virginia's a world beater, but the Cavaliers were 4-0. And a pretty decent ACC team for what that's worth. So maybe a pretty decent ACC team equates to a middling SEC team. But my point is Notre Dame is a better football team than we thought that they were, and it kind of explained why Kirby Smart was so careful with his offense in that game against Notre Dame. Now, all that said, I still think the Bulldogs have to open it up. I'm with Tim Tebow on this one. I don't know if you saw Tebow's comments. He says for Georgia to win a national championship, they're going to have to open up the offense. I agree with that. That said, let's remember a lot of new receivers on this team. Jake Fromm still getting comfortable with George Pickens, Don Blaylock, Lawrence Cager, doing it under the lights at game speed. And I thought you saw Cager had a great breakout performance. I think we've seen George Pickens do some magical things, and Dominic Blaylock has proven to be a very explosive football player. Georgia did hold on to number 3 in the AP and coaches poll. If the season were to end today, Georgia would be in that number 3 slot. We all know what's ahead. Georgia's going to have to win the SEC title more than likely to make the college football playoff, whether it's Alabama waiting, whether it's LSU, whether it's Auburn. More good news to me is that none of those 3 teams look very dominating to me. LSU scoring a lot of points, but they gave up 38 points to Vanderbilt. And Alabama won 59-31, but they gave up 279 yards rushing to Ole Miss. Auburn, they've got a heck of a gauntlet ahead schedule-wise. You know, if you're an Auburn Tiger, you can't be real happy with the SEC League office and how this permanent opponent thing works. You're Auburn, you got to play Georgia and Florida from the East. Alabama draws South Carolina and Tennessee. Big advantage for the Crimson Tide in those crossover games. I think crossover games are something that the league office ought to look at anyway. We know that the SEC's not moving to 9 games anytime soon. I think the least they could do would be to abolish that crossover game so that teams could play more games in different stadiums over the course of their career. For example, Georgia doesn't go back to LSU until 2029. Kirby Smart brought that up last year. He liked the different experiences of going to different stadiums. I think it would be good to have different teams coming into Sanford Stadium as well, particularly if Georgia's going to continue to play neutral site games and not have a strong home schedule. Think about this. That Georgia-Notre Dame game was so special, and to me the very sad part is that you don't have a worthwhile non-conference FBS team coming in here till 2025. And I use that qualification because I really don't count Georgia Tech. And I'm not trying to insult the Yellow Jackets, but that's a game that does nothing for anyone outside of this state, and it doesn't have much sex appeal if we're being honest about it. So I don't think Georgia gets another marquee non-conference top 25 potential team until UCLA in 2025 in Sanford Stadium. That's disappointing. It's also one more reason to move the Florida game to Athens. Let's save that topic for a whole nother show. It's Tennessee week, and the Georgia Bulldogs are coming off of a bye. And Kirby had some priorities last week after the game, the things that he wanted done to the offense. Number 1, he wants the plays to get signaled in to Jake Fromm earlier, faster, and quicker. And this is because Jake Fromm is at his best when he calls plays at the line of scrimmage. Jake's got an ability to read defenses and coverages and shift and audible into the right play. You'll see him do that a lot against Tennessee. Jeremy Pruitt is going to throw a lot of different fronts at him, and he's going to crowd the line of scrimmage just like Vanderbilt did and just like Notre Dame did. So, what's the answer? The second thing that Kirby Smart asked for, specifically, more throws to George Pickens. He didn't just say more throws downfield. He said we have to get the ball to George Pickens downfield more. That's Kirby Smart circling George Pickens, letting everybody know that George Pickens is a special player. If you hadn't already figured that out. Now, I've gone on record and said that, and I've had some people say, is he really the best freshman you've ever covered, receiver? He is absolutely the most talented freshman receiver I have ever covered in 27 years as a beat writer. George Pickens is very special. Now, he has to grow, he has to mature, he has to evolve. His route tree has to expand. It can't just be the go on the sideline. He's got to add a post to that, an in and out, a slant. George Pickens needs to continue to develop his chemistry with Jake Fromm. But right now, what they need from George Pickens is that ability to beat press coverage and go deep downfield on the perimeter. We've already seen that Lawrence Cager can do that. If you put a 6'4 Pickens on one side and a 6'5 Cager on the other, and that other team wants to put cornerbacks out there one-on-one, Jake Fromm's going to audible to that fade or that go route every time, and there's going to be some explosive plays. So the two things we've talked about so far that Kirby wanted coming out of that game, number one, play calls getting in quicker to Jake so he can change plays at the line of scrimmage. Two, getting the ball downfield more to George Pickens. And three, getting the ball out in space to playmakers. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means better perimeter runs, and we saw the tight ends working on a lot of open field blocking this week against linebackers. They missed some blocks. Both Eli Wolf and Charlie Warner missed some open field blocks that could have sprung some big gains. So Georgia wants the perimeter run game to open up. They need to get the ball more to James Cook. Cook only had one touch in the offense. I think he had one kickoff return for 16 yards and one carry that might have gone for 4 or -4. I can't recall, but Notre Dame did a really nice job stuffing it there in the fourth quarter. You've got to get the ball to Cook in space. It all sounds so great, but it all comes at a cost. And what's the cost? Well, if you're Jake Fromm, there's only one ball that can go around. If you target George Pickens 6 times, maybe you don't get to target Matt Landers 3 times and Tyler Simmons 3 times. If you want to see more Zamir White or Kenny McIntosh, maybe Brian Herrien doesn't get 8 to 10 carries. Maybe DeAndre Swift doesn't get 16 to 20. So if you're Kirby Smart and you're James Coley, you've got to figure out a way to balance this out. It's not about what's fair, okay? Let's just be clear about that. It's about what's best. It's about what helps the team win. That's what's fair. What's fair is playing your best players and winning football games and winning championships. Because when you win championships, everybody benefits from the top down. So that's what's fair, is getting the ball to the guys that are making plays. Now, I'm not here to tell you that the way that the breakdown went last week, that there was anything wrong with it, because they were able to beat Notre Dame. And I can't tell you right now whether I think DeAndre Swift should never go over the 17-carry plateau, or whether Brian Herrien should have 5 carries or 10 carries, or whether it should be Kenny McIntosh or Zamir White getting what's left over, if any. I can tell you the one thing I will go on the record with is that George Pickens needs to be targeted more than twice in every football game, and James Cook needs more than 1 touch. After that, I'll leave that up to the experts, James Coley, Jake Fromm, and Kirby Smart. So those are a few things Georgia worked on. They worked on that fade route a lot. They're going to anticipate seeing a crowded box. Kirby wants to find a way to make those teams pay, and the way to make those teams pay is with deep strikes and game-breaking plays, getting the ball in space to a James Cook, who makes one guy miss and can take it to the house, or going deep to a Lawrence Cager or George Pickens, or if Tyler Simmons is able to start getting open more and catching the football, or Matt Landers for that. But Dominic Blaylock, another guy I think needs more touches. You know, I think Blaylock has shown you every time the ball's in his hands, I think he's done really good things. So those are some things I would look for moving forward, is how the personnel gets broken down, how the carries, how the targets. And we can argue and discuss all day, but all that really matters is what number 11 sees when he goes under center and what matchups he likes. What really matters is who Jake Fromm thinks should get the football. So, by the way, I see we got a guest here. I see that we've got Brandon Adams, Gator Hater Squirrel. We're going to leave him here today. He was having such a good day here in the studio, and Florida's got a big game against Auburn, so I don't want to jinx BA's deal right here with the Gator Hater Squirrel. So we'll keep him on the set for the show. We can talk a little bit about Tennessee now. Connor Riley, who did a really good piece this morning. We try to work and cater with our audience. We really do. We want to cater to the DawgNation audience. We want to give you the information that you need, and we're well aware that Justin Fields and transfers are can be kind of a combustible topic. Those guys have moved on. You want to talk about the guys that are here, and we get that. But the reality of it is that Justin Fields will always be attached to Georgia, and that there's been a lot of national discussion about him and his exit from Georgia. I thought Connor did a really good story this morning. If you haven't read it, go on DawgNation, of kind of explaining, the national media wants to come in now and say, I don't know why Georgia didn't want to keep him. I don't know why Georgia didn't give him a chance. Well, they did give him a chance, and they did want to keep him. Maybe to their own demise at the Sugar Bowl. I thought it was overly nice of Kirby Smart to say, sure, Justin, you're transferring away, but come on this Sugar Bowl trip with us. That was Kirby's last gasp, but trying to convince Justin Fields to stay. But the fact of the matter is this. Justin Fields was not as good as Jake Fromm last season. Now, maybe he is now. He's got a year of college development under his belt, but the Justin Fields that you're seeing right now isn't the one that was at Georgia a year ago. He's not running the same offense either. And he's also not really faced the competition. Now, I think Justin Fields is going to be a fantastic NFL player. I predicted at the start of this season that he'd be sitting in New York as a Heisman finalist. And I've said since the start of the season that I didn't expect Ohio State to lose a game in the regular season. Now, what that's going to lead to is some faulty conclusions from outsiders that Georgia somehow blew it with this guy, when in reality, all they did was a really good job recruiting. The same thing happened at Clemson, right? Kelly Bryant was the quarterback. New quarterback comes in. Now, in that situation, Trevor Lawrence won the job, and Bryant moved on to Missouri. But you're going to see more and more of this in college football with the transfer portal. You see it right now. Quarterbacks transfer. It's a phenomena that Kirby Smart saw coming a long time ago. I've written about it a few times. Kirby had a plan. He wanted to give Justin Fields every opportunity to win the job. He wanted to play him in every game that he could. And sometimes they played him even when Jake Fromm was having a great game. Again, maybe to their own demise. You look at some of the times that Justin was put in. But I thought Kirby was smart with him. I think it would have been better if Justin Fields would have had a package. I know Tim Tebow talked about that last year, doing what's best for the team, but that's not how Justin Fields came in. He wanted to win the job outright. And so that's how it goes. Dabo Swinney was asked about this last year at the national championship game. I was standing right there, folks, and Dabo said, look, folks, I'm not going to recruit backup quarterbacks. In other words, you recruit the best players that you have, and what happens, happens. And that's what happened to Georgia. And I'll leave it right there. I think Connor's piece did a nice job with that today, though, if you want to check that out. Now, we look at the Georgia situation and the Georgia personnel, and it's a matter of who's going to be healthy enough to play this week at Tennessee. Tyson Campbell did not practice yesterday. Kirby says he's healing quickly. I think Tyson Campbell is very important. For all the talk that Kirby did in the preseason about how good he felt about his DBs, we saw that he was really only 3 deep. Tyreek McGee is a safety that played cornerback in a pinch. I don't think that you're going to want to do that week in and week out. Tyreek Stevenson, the talented freshman, the one that Dan Lanning said, holy moly, we got a ball player. Apparently he wasn't a ball player yet because they didn't trust him out there. Let's see if Stevenson's ready this week. He's physical, he's athletic, but he is a true freshman. That said, Tyson Campbell was a true freshman last year and did an adequate job most of the time. So keep an eye on the cornerbacks. Eric Stokes was back at practice. Let's see if Tyson Campbell gets back. That's the one area where Tennessee could have a favorable matchup. Tennessee's got very good receivers on the outside. Callaway and Juwan Jennings are both big, strong, physical receivers. Now, who's going to be back behind center for Tennessee? That's a whole nother question. There's been some rumblings in Knoxville about a quarterback change. And I understand that because when teams start losing, what do coaches do? Many times they'll change quarterbacks. I think in this case that would be premature for Tennessee, and I think they're making Jared Garantano a scapegoat. This guy has had 4 different offensive coordinators in 4 years. And there was a column written today in Knoxville by John Adams, and he said, hey, last summer, Jeremy Pruitt was telling everybody how good Jarrett Garantano was. He was like a pro. He could handle this and handle that. Now, suddenly, that Tennessee's losing football games, the blame is being shifted on Jarrett Garantano. How about this? How about the fact that Tennessee's playing different offensive linemen every week? How about the fact that Tennessee's got guys going back and forth between running back and linebacker? And how about the fact that some of the game management hasn't been the best? So everyone sees what's happening at Tennessee. It's a difficult time for the Vols. They're bringing a lot of it on themselves. There's been a lot of turnovers this year. Kirby referenced that yesterday. If Tennessee goes out and plays a clean game, though, Georgia's going to have to show up. And all you got to do is hit rewind and remember that a lot of these same players on the Tennessee football team beat Auburn at Auburn last year. And I'm not saying Auburn was a world beater, and they certainly weren't as good as Georgia. But the fact of the matter is, the guys that are in that huddle have beaten good teams before and played good football before. So don't go to sleep on Tennessee. This is a game Georgia needs to play well. I think you're going to see Kirby with, again, a somewhat conservative game plan, not wanting to turn the ball over. Some of that's Jake. Some of that's Jake Fromm not wanting to go downfield. Jake manages this team. I like to compare it to Jake flying the airplane. I said to somebody, I think I want Jake Fromm flying my airplane. He's the guy I want in the pilot seat. I trust Jake. I think he knows when to change altitude. I think he can land the plane in the storm if he needs to. He's a guy that's not going to take chances that he doesn't have to take. And so that's the thing that you've got going for you. So it may be Jake Fromm that's not putting that airplane at full throttle, that's not changing altitude until he feels turbulence. And I think Jake's a guy that's going to be able to handle the crowd at Neyland Stadium and manage that game effectively. But the Georgia defense will need to continue to play well. The havoc rate, it's on the way up. This is another reason why I don't think that Tennessee should change quarterbacks. Now, I got a call last night from a former Tennessee quarterback talking to me about what's going on there. He's of the mindset there could be a quarterback change. I don't know if there will or not. I think we will ultimately see both Tennessee quarterbacks. I don't think the game plan changes for Georgia, regardless of who's under center. But if I were Tennessee, I'd want the experienced guy back there, because I think this Georgia defense right now is a lot better than a lot of people realize. I think it's special. And I did a numbers story last week. It ran Friday, and you can look at the metrics. This could end up being better than the 2017 defense. Let me tell you, that's a mouthful, because that 27 defense was special. And I think this defense could be special too. Need those corners to get back healthy. You're watching the Ingles on the Beat segment. We come to each Tuesday. I want to take a look and see your comments, your thoughts on the game. What do we got here? Somebody's telling me it was 3 years ago today that Tennessee beat Georgia on Josh Dobbs' Hail Mary. Let me just make one point. There's a lot of revisionist history going on right now. A lot of people were asking Georgia players, well, since you weren't alive the last time Georgia was good, what do you think? And Jake Fromm just looked at one guy like, I don't know who you are, but you're crazy. And Jake's like, yeah, we got to go out there and win. Like, he wasn't answering it. Why? Because 3 years ago, Tennessee beat Georgia. In fact, Tennessee beat Georgia in back-to-back years. It was a top 25 program going to bowl games annually and was ranked in the top 10 after that Georgia win. So a lot of people want to pretend like nothing good happened during the Butch Jones era, but they actually set a single-season record in 2016, and we're headed to the New Orleans Sugar Bowl had they beaten Vanderbilt, had Alvin Kamara not ran out in front of the first down markers inexplicably in the fourth quarter. Back to your questions, your comments. When does the team travel to Knoxville? Kevin Cook wants to know. They fly in Friday. I'm not sure if they're going to do a walkthrough at the stadium. I know teams used to do walkthroughs at the stadium. I'm not sure how often Georgia does that anymore. That used to be very commonplace. Let's see here. What other questions do we have? Nervous, our O-line didn't keep Notre Dame on the ropes. Justin Johnson. And you're worried about the tight end not being covered. Okay, Justin, a couple things there. One, you might have missed the start of the show. Notre Dame proved to have a pretty good defense. They did lose a great player named Dalen Hayes to a torn labrum last week, so they may not be quite as fierce moving forward. But they had 8 sacks against Virginia, only allowed 4 yards rushing. So I think that Notre Dame defense was a lot better than we thought. That Notre Dame front might be about as good as Georgia's going to see. I know Auburn's really good and Florida's really good, but I think Notre Dame was really good too. As far as the front being nervous, it was interesting. Kirby Smart said at his press conference that he thought Solomon Kinley would be back at practice. We go to practice, Solomon Kinley wasn't there. Justin Schaefer was there. Now, sometimes what happens is early in practice, the media is there, and the guys will come out after the media leaves. So I remember that happened in the preseason with DeAndre Swift. Everybody remember that scare when DeAndre decided to wear an injured jersey color to practice one day and wasn't out there during media viewing on the other one. And it almost happened with Demetrius Robertson a couple weeks ago. He was missing for practice, and then as we're leaving practice, he comes running out of the locker room with his hamstring with tape on it. So it could be as simple as Solomon going out there after the media had left, or maybe they elected to hold him out another day. Maybe he won't play in this game. I don't know. I know that Kirby Smart said he was pleased with Justin Schaefer outside of that 15-yard penalty. As far as leaving the tight end open, I don't think anybody expected Cole Kmet to look like Rob Gronkowski. That guy is a special player, as we saw. Georgia did a really nice job adjusting in the second half. Had about 2 or 3 pass breakups when they tried to go to him again. So a lot of times with Kirby, in the first quarter, it's a pretty conservative game plan. Defensively, he doesn't want to give up the big play, and then he adjusts and zeroes in. Listen, Kirby Smart's a great defensive mind. He's got a lot of talented players, and he's got a lot of different personnel packages he can hit you with. But I think the tight end did catch him a little off guard. He hadn't played yet that season. He had a fractured collarbone. So, Notre Dame might have caught him a little bit early, but once Kirby adjusted, you really didn't see the Notre Dame tight end do too much. This week, Tennessee does have some good skill position players. That said, I don't think they have the offensive line to provide the type of protection that they would need to provide, for them to really get to Georgia's secondary. Particularly if Eric Stokes is running 100%. DJ Daniel came in there, I thought did a great job in that game. I don't think he got enough credit for that, but I thought he played really well. I had a story about Georgia going 3 for 3. Really, it was 4 for 4 when you think about Jermaine Johnson. But you take a look at the transfers that Georgia brought in, and you really just got to tip your cap to Kirby Smart and James Coley and the staff. I mean, to go out and get a guy like Lawrence Cager, get a guy like Eli Wolf, and they get DJ Daniel out of junior college and Jermaine Johnson out of junior college. I mean, you talk about 4 impact guys. Now, I think we'll see Jermaine Johnson continue to evolve as the season progresses. He was in there on the final play with Nolan Smith, chasing Ian Book out of the pocket. DJ Daniel was the guy that knocked the ball down. We saw Cager have an MVP performance, and we saw Eli Wolf catch a big third down pass on Georgia's first scoring drive in that game. So, Eli Wolf in Tennessee, I almost won't say it in the same sentence. He's a transfer from Tennessee, and I was a little surprised, and maybe I'd even say disappointed that Jeremy Pruitt, when he was going over the Georgia personnel, would mention Charlie Werner but not Eli Wolf. It was a very obvious omission. We get it that Jeremy's not happy that Eli Wolf transferred, but Eli probably wasn't happy that he only had 5 targets all of last season and was pretty much demoted behind a junior college guy after being brought to media days and leading the team in catches in spring. So all I've heard from Eli Wolf is good things. When we've talked to him about Tennessee earlier this year, he said, hey, I'm not rooting for these guys to lose. They're my friends. Tennessee did a lot for me. Eli's older brother, Ethan, obviously graduated from Tennessee. They gave Eli a scholarship after he walked on, and he had a lot of positive things to say. I was disappointed that Jeremy Pruitt didn't respond in kind and at least say something like, it's good to say things worked out for Eli, but he didn't. So that tells you what you need to know there. Probably some hurt feelings, or however you might want to describe that mood right there. Our linebackers didn't do well covering the Notre Dame tight end. Well, Sandy Puckett, sometimes it wasn't the linebackers. Sometimes it was the safeties. And a lot of times Georgia was in zone concept. Again, Georgia did adjust in the second half. That's not something I would worry about in this game. Now, Tennessee does have a good tight end. His name's Dominic Wood Anderson. He was the number 1 JUCO tight end a couple years ago. I don't think that's your biggest concern. I think Juwan Jennings is your biggest concern. He's a fighter. He is the guy that came down with a catch 3 years ago, but beyond that, he's their resident tough guy, and he's a competitor. And as Juwan goes, the Vols often go. So to me, that's the guy that you need to have a corner ready to put on lockdown. It would be good if Tyreek Stevenson was ready for this game, the freshman. He's big and strong and physical enough to stay with a guy like Juwan Jennings. I think Eric Stokes might have his hands full with him. Tyson Campbell would be another good matchup. But to me, that's the most concerning matchup right now for Georgia is a wide receiver, Juwan Jennings. And if Jared Garantano plays, he is an experienced enough guy to be able to find Juwan Jennings in a crowd. Nate Thomas, Jake Kamara had a bad game punting. He will bounce back. Yes, and Kirby Smart said as much. Kirby was really quick after the game to say, look, guy had a couple bad punts. We got his back. He's also had some boomers. Kamara has not been the most consistent guy. He's a sophomore. He's talented, but he's like everybody else on this Georgia football team. You got to produce, okay? That's where Georgia football is at right now. The standard is so high that even when Georgia wins a battle of top 10 teams, we're all zeroing in on the weaknesses. Why? Because we all know that it's a national championship type of season or bust. I mean, really, that's what Georgia needs to do this year is win the national title. I have a hard time believing anybody would be happy, truly happy, with anything less. Georgia is past moral victories. Staying close to Alabama doesn't do anything for anyone. Kirby Smart said it himself, 24-5 is not good enough. Now, Kirby clarified that. He said, we can win 33 games, and I'd say it wouldn't be good enough. But look, we get the point. Nobody wants to set Kirby up for failure and say that a 12-win season should, or less than a 12-win season should put somebody on the hot seat. But what happens in these programs like Georgia, championship programs like Alabama, like Clemson, like Ohio State, is that when you don't win championships, it becomes a disappointment. There's only a handful of programs that would really say that. Okay, so that's kind of a compliment, but the flip side is these coaches work pretty hard, and if Georgia were to have some untimely injury, well, last year, for example, Georgia should have been in the college football playoff. Again, I've argued it. They were better than Oklahoma. They were one of the 4 best. They didn't make it, and when they didn't make it, their hearts were broken, and it was not the same team that played in the Sugar Bowl, quite literally. Their best player sat out, which sends a message to the rest of the team. I mean, think about the deal that Kirby Smart was trying to manage in New Orleans. Forget Bourbon Street, okay? The Georgia guys were disciplined down there and handled their business down there. Nobody was out there breaking curfew or throwing beads from the top of the roof at 2 a.m. and dancing backwards on the street. That wasn't happening. But the circus that you did have was your best player was down there hanging out with the team, not playing. Your defensive captain, DeAndre Walker, was injured. He was killing him not to play. You guys saw he was having an MVP game against Alabama before he went out with that sports hernia. He didn't even know how bad he was hurt at the time. He was trying to practice with an injury that would require surgery 2 weeks later. DeAndre Walker's doing everything he can to get on the field. DeAndre Baker's on the phone with his agent during the game, okay? Then you got 2 guys that really don't want to be there. Well, one that does and one that doesn't. Luke Ford really didn't want to be there. They convinced him to go. They're trying to keep him around. He's a 5-star tight end. He ended up transferring back to Illinois. Now he's sitting out because he didn't get eligible. And Justin Fields, who wanted to go on this field trip, even though he knew he wasn't sticking with the team, and Kirby Smart let him stick around. So you had all this, and then on top of it, you had a Georgia team that felt like they got duped by the College Football Playoff Committee and a head coach that said that. So, and then on the other side of the ball, let's give credit to Texas. You got a team trying to win 10 games. You got a team playing their first bowl game outside their own state in 8 years. They hadn't played a bowl game outside the state of Texas in 8 years, folks. And a pretty good coach in Tom Herman and a motivated quarterback, right? So they lost. And what was it? It was a disappointment. Georgia was 11-3, and everybody, what a disappointing season. They won a lot of good football games. That Georgia team we saw in November last year was as good as anybody, right? I mean, they were mowing people down. They destroyed Florida. They went up to Kentucky and reminded Kentucky that they were a basketball school. They put Auburn in their place. I mean, DeAndre Swift was averaging about 10 yards a carry last November. Monty Rice was getting 9 or 10 tackles a game. What happened? Monty Rice gets hurt, right? Things change. DeAndre Baker, first-round draft projection. Alabama game, DeAndre Walker gets injured. Jalen Hurts comes off the bench and has a legendary – things happen, okay? But that was not to me. To me, I thought that Georgia football team played hard, and I thought they won a lot of good games. But still, at the end of the year, we're talking 11-3. Oh, what a disappointment. So I'm just trying to make the point. Now, this team this year, same deal. If they don't win the SEC championship game, be disappointed. If they don't play in the college football playoff, I'd be disappointed because I think they're that good. Right now, things can change, right? And the next step is the Tennessee game. That's why these players are so focused, because they all know that it doesn't matter what we think right now. It doesn't matter where they're at right now. As long as they keep winning and take care of business, they're going to put themselves in position to win the big prize. I'm at the risk of losing some of the audience here, I'm going to throw a NASCAR analogy out there. I'll probably lose some of you. One of the big things in NASCAR that they always would say, though, the drivers would say, is you got to be around at the end of the race to win it. In other words, you can't do anything too crazy during the race. You can't risk crashing on lap 200 of a 300-lap race. And to go one step further, at a restrictor plate race like a Daytona or a Talladega, you got to be somewhere in the pack, and then at the end, whoever makes the move. And that's kind of the way college football is. You got to kind of position yourself to be in the race at the end of the year. And then once you're there at the end of the year in that 4 or 16 pack, you got to be the guys that are playing the best. You got to be the guys that get best drafting partner, the best matchup, right? 2 years ago, Alabama got the better matchup. They got a bye because they didn't have to play in the SEC championship game, and then they drew a bad Clemson team and played them in New Orleans, and Georgia got shipped all the way out to the left coast to play a good Oklahoma team and went overtime, basically lost an entire day of preparation in their travel back. Do I think that made the difference in the national championship game? Absolutely. I absolutely do. So the point is this. What's happening right now is important, but not nearly as important as where the team's going to be at the end of the year. And I'll dial it back to what we were talking about earlier about the offense evolving. Yes, the offense needs to evolve, but it doesn't need to evolve all at once. This is going to be a season-long process, right? Kirby Smart is going to manage these players to bring them along and keep the team as close to full strength as he can along the way. Some people said, why didn't Zamir White carry? Well, why did he need to? Brian Herrien was doing a good job, right? And really, Zamir White, to me, looks a lot like Brian Herrien. I think Brian might be a little bit better pass catcher and might be a little more consistent in some areas. But Zamir, to me, runs just like Brian Herrien. I think they're the same guy. Now, Kenny McIntosh is a little different. He brings a little wiggle and maybe a little bit more home run speed. I'm not sure where Zamir's at after those first 5 or 6 steps. We'll find out. He might break a 90-yard one. I could be wrong. I just haven't seen it yet. What I see him doing is running over people and through people, and I think we may see him in short yardage. But my point is, this is a team that's going to evolve as the season goes. And by the time they get to this November stretch, and let's make no mistake about it, that's when Georgia's season is going to be make or break, is November, when the schedule gets really tough with Florida and Missouri and Auburn and Texas A&M. That's going to be a tough stretch there. That's when I think you're going to see this offense open up. And I think that's when Georgia will be peaking. Until then, you're going to see guys develop and brought along slowly. And again, this game in Knoxville is one more step. It's up to Jake Fromm to keep the school bus out of the ditch here. What do we got here? Questions back to you now. And Kevin Drummer says it. There's so much football left to play. No, Alan Kaysen says it. So much football left to play. Yes, Alan, that's completely my sentiment as well. I don't think anybody needs to panic about what's happening for Georgia football right now. I think Kirby's got a plan here. Greg Marsh says Swift win the Heisman. From National Championship MVP. I don't think DeAndre Swift is going to win the Heisman. I don't even think he'll be invited to New York. And it's not because he's not a great player. It's just because, number one, he's a running back, and this is a award that highly favors quarterbacks. And I don't think he's going to have the number of plays and the type of total yardage. And just so you know, that's fine with Swift. Swift wants to carry as much as he needs to carry to win games, right? Obviously, if it worked out where DeAndre had a big workload and could put up those kind of numbers, but the reality of it is probably not going to happen. Jake Fromm probably has a better chance of being a Heisman candidate because he's a quarterback. And as long as George is undefeated and he's the quarterback on an undefeated team that's ranked in the top 2 or 3, his name's going to get mentioned. I mean, Jake Fromm hasn't even thrown an interception yet. And I do think as the year progresses, Jake's going to go downfield more, and you'll see some bigger passing numbers. Alan Kaysen, we can dream, right? No doubt, Alan, and you should dream. Rick Wallace says Heisman goes to players with the video game numbers. Used to be about all-around best. I think Rick's right. I think it's a what have you done for me lately society. Let's see who's hot in the month of November. Let's see who's undefeated. You know that Jalen Hurts is in the mix. You know that Justin Fields is in the mix. Justin Herbert is a guy at Oregon that's a pro prospect. Everybody loves him. I don't know what kind of numbers he's going to put up, but I think it would be hard the way that Georgia likes to spread the ball and use everyone, which is smart. I think it would be hard to project a Heisman Trophy for Georgia. Let's take a look here. Any other questions for me before we close down? You're watching the Eagles on the Beat segment. Enjoy doing the show every Tuesday. I enjoy your comments. I think this is going to be a fun game on Saturday. I'm looking forward to seeing how Kirby Smart and James Coley and Jake Fromm work in this offense. I'm looking forward to seeing more deep passes to George Pickens. Armand Rashad says, I like where we are as a team. The X factor is James Cook. I would agree. I think Cook is very dangerous, and I think he's a huge open field threat. John Benton wants to know, do Monty and Tay hold off the young talent? Listen, I had just about, I'm going to be honest here, I had just about written off Tay Crowder as an NFL prospect. I had. I'm going to be honest. I thought he looked a step slow in one of those games earlier this year. I thought he reacted slow. But this last game against Notre Dame, and I can't disclose who, but I talked to an NFL scout, and he said to me, he really surprised me. And I said, well, he did me too. You look at Tay. He's got an NFL prototypical frame. He's 6'3", 235, and he runs like the wind. But how quick does he react? Tay told me yesterday that he put the extra time in the film room and he paid attention to little things, and that made all the difference for him against Notre Dame. If Tay Crowder plays like that the rest of this year, he will be an NFL draft pick. If Tay Crowder plays like he did against Notre Dame every week and shows that level of preparation, he will get an invite to a postseason all-star game. He will get an invite to the combine, and he will be drafted. But he must continue to play with that attention to detail and with that level of ferocity. That's what's going to get him in the league. Anything less, like going into the Notre Dame game, he wasn't on the radar, folks. Okay? The Tay Crowder before the Notre Dame game, nobody's thinking about drafting him. But he showed up, and he showed out. And if he can continue to play like that, Tay Crowder could be an NFL player. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure. But you know what? That's what these guys sign up for, and Tay has already come a long way. When you look at his journey and how he was a receiver and he was a 2-star recruit at one point, his only other SEC offer was Kentucky, right? He's playing running back on Rick's team. Kirby gets here and moves him halfway through the season linebacker. Kirby Smart saved his career. He really did. And Tay is now responding because it takes time to go from playing offense to defense. It takes time to get a feel for that. And I just feel like the light has gone on for Tay Crowder. I'm really excited about him. I've interviewed him several times. Listen, he is a very polite young man. This is a guy you would root for. If you knew him personally, you would want to see Tay Crowder do well. He is that nice of a young man. And I know his mom is proud of him, and I know that the DawgNation is proud of him, and I know that Georgia fans are proud of him. So while we talk about backup guys like Quay Walker, and he's, certainly impressive. And Nakobe Dean, right? These young guys are coming on. They're going to challenge for their time. But if Tay's holding the job and he's the senior, feel good about that story too. Feel good about Monty Rice coming back from an injury. Haven't really seen Monty go off this year like I thought he might, but maybe that's just been a matter of game plan. So I'm going to keep my eyes open for number 32 to show up big. We've already seen Tay Crowder show up big. Nakobe Dean is coming along. He did have an ankle earlier. Quay Walker had some opportunities, flashed a little bit. But right now, Tay Crowder's playing for an NFL career. So that's a story that you can root for. You got to root for these guys that have given it up for the G and hope it works out for them. By the same token, at other positions, and you've heard me talk about it, if there's a young guy that's outshining the senior, Kirby's got a responsibility to put the best guy out there. He's got a responsibility to throw the football to the best playmaker, okay? And there's going to be some tough decisions. Listen, Brian Herrien has fought hard to earn everything he's gotten, but Zamir White wants carries too, and there's only one ball, and Kenny McIntosh didn't come here to sit, right? That's a tough decision. I would hate to be the one to make that decision. I'm not at practice every day. I know this. When I watch those running backs, they're all busting it. Hey, listen, those Georgia practices, folks, let me tell you, they're no joke. Those kids are going at it. They're not standing around talking and dancing to music like I've seen other places, all right? They're going at it. There's focus, and they've all earned their place. So don't take it lightly when a guy gets a carry. He's earned that carry. He's shown the coach something. And Kirby's not doing it just because he likes the guy or because the fans want him. Kirby's doing it because that's how you win games. Coley's doing it because that's the guy that was best on that play. All right? And that's what you're going to see evolve this season. The guys that give the team the best chance to win are going to be on the field. And everybody in the locker room understands it. Georgia's not one of these programs where everybody is back snapping and why didn't I get this and why didn't No, that doesn't happen in the locker room with the players. The parents might get a little ticked off, but that does not happen with the players at Georgia. I'll give you an example. Charlie Warner goes out. The first player to contact Eli Wolf was Jake Fromm. The second was Charlie Warner. And there's a lot of people going, I want to see Charlie catch the ball. He's been here. Charlie doesn't run a 4.5 40, folks. He doesn't run routes as good as Eli Wolf. And Charlie knows it. He works hard. He competes against him. Charlie's still the guy. Charlie's still getting most of the snaps. But Charlie Warner was the guy that helped recruit Eli Wolf. And I asked him about it. He said, because I want my team to be at its best. That's how they think at Georgia. That's how these players think. They want the ring. They want the championship. Their needs come secondary to the team. And if it doesn't work like that for the player, he hits the transfer portal and goes somewhere else. And we know who that is. And that's where I'm going to end it here today. Georgia at Tennessee, Saturday night. Can't wait. We'll have more great copy for you on DawgNation.com. BA's with you every day on DawgNation Daily. I'll be his guest at 10:15 tomorrow. I hope everybody has a great Tuesday. Hope everybody enjoys the game this weekend.